Have you ever wondered if the city itself could get revenge? What if the strange story you heard online about the smiling killer of Central Park wasn't about a person at all? The victims, all wealthy, all powerful, are found with looks of pure, peaceful bliss on their faces. No marks, no toxins, just a perfect, terrifying smile. And the only witness is a girl who can make flowers bloom from concrete with a single touch. What would you do if you discovered the killer wasn't a monster, but a miracle? Welcome to Midnight Fables Tales. Now, close your eyes and let the story begin.
My name is Alex Graham, and I make a living by dissecting lies. For 10 years at the New York Times, I'd seen every flavor of human depravity. I thought I understood the anatomy of sin. That was before I saw the body of Carl Harrington. He was the third rich, connected man to be found in Central Park in as many months, dead with a beatific smile plastered on his face. The NYPD had a clinical term for it: unspecified neurological shock. But in the darker corners of the internet and in the hushed whispers of bartenders downtown, he had another name: the third victim of the smiling killer. And I, thanks to a cryptic tip sent to my burner phone, was the first journalist on the scene. The scene itself was wrong. It was dawn near the boathouse, and a low mist clung to the ground, making the world feel soft and unreal. The air was thick with the cloying, sweet scent of wisteria, a flower that shouldn't have been in such riotous purple bloom this time of year. It draped over everything, weaving through the railings and hanging from the trees in thick, fragrant curtains. And there he was, Carl Harrington. He wasn't just lying there, he was arranged. He sat propped against a great oak, his tailored suit impeccable, not a thread out of place. His limbs were cradled, not constrained, by slender vines of that same wisteria, as if the very park was holding him in a gentle, final embrace. But it was his face that stole the breath from my lungs. It was fixed in a perfect, serene smile. Too perfect. The corners of his lips were upturned exactly right, but the skin around his eyes was smooth, devoid of any crow's feet, or the genuine joy that usually accompanies such an expression. It was a mask of happiness, carved onto a corpse. A uniformed cop was vomiting into the bushes. The lead detective, a grim-faced veteran named Miller, just shook his head as the forensics team moved in with a hushed, professional reverence. No trauma, no signs of a struggle, no toxins in the preliminary sweep. It's like he just decided to be happy until he died, Miller muttered. Not to me, but to the unsettling peace of it all. I crouched down, my reporter's instinct overriding the primal fear crawling up my spine. As the coroner's team carefully lifted the body, something impossible happened. The vibrant purple wisteria blossoms that had been woven around him seemed to sigh. Their color drained in seconds, fading from royal purple to a sickly gray before crumbling into a fine, scentless dust. It was as if their life force was tied solely to his, and then I felt it. A faint, cool sensation under my shoes. I looked down. Where I had been standing, a perfect circle of white clover had sprung from the earth, its tiny flowers blooming in a silent, impossible salute to death. That's when I saw her. Across the crime scene tape, half hidden in the deep shadow of an ancient American elm, stood a girl. She was wearing a simple off-white linen dress, and her feet were bare on the damp grass. Her hair was the color of dark earth, and her eyes, even from this distance, I could see they were the color of a deep, ancient forest. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was one of profound, unsettling sadness, a stark contrast to the rictus on the dead man's face. She looked like a ghost, a dryad stepped out of a myth. I ducked under the tape and approached her, my press badge feeling like a useless trinket. The grass didn't seem to crunch under my steps the way it should have. "You know him?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the empty space where the body had been. "Know him?" Her voice was distant, melodic, like wind chimes. I know every leaf that is tired of the soot, every inch of soil that screams in pain. It made no sense. Yet, it felt like the only truth spoken here all morning. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling out a card. If you think of anything else, my name is Alex Graham. She turned her head then. Those forest green eyes held mine, and I felt pinned, examined down to my soul. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers not touching the card, but brushing against the cheap metal pen I held clutched in my other hand. A shock, not of electricity, but of pure, vibrant life, shot up my arm. I gasped and looked down. Where her fingers had touched, a thin green tendril was sprouting from the pen's clip. It grew and fast forward, unfurling a single, perfect blossom of cornflower blue. She withdrew her hand, her expression unchanged. "You see," she whispered, "it has chosen to be more true, now." She turned and walked away, her bare feet making no sound, melting into the tree line without a backward glance. The last words she spoke hung in the sweet, poisoned air. "He is not in pain anymore. The earth has accepted his confession. This is good." I stood there, a grown man, a cynical journalist, clutching a pen that had just bloomed. The logical framework of my world, carefully constructed over a decade, lay in shattered ruins at my feet. And the terrifying, exhilarating thought that clawed its way into my brain wasn't one of fear. It was that I had finally found a story that was truly, unforgivably alive. My apartment had become a war room. The wall opposite my desk was a chaotic mosaic of death and mystery. Crime scene photos of 3 smiling men were pinned in a row. Below them, timelines, property records, and news clippings from 15 years ago formed a tangled web. And in the center of it all, a single, slightly blurred photo I'd managed to snatch with a long lens. The girl from the park, her forest eyes looking straight through the camera. Evelyn Rose. The name was a ghost itself. The only daughter of botanists Liam and Eleanor Rose, who perished in a catastrophic fire that consumed their state-of-the-art research lab on the outskirts of the city. The official cause was faulty wiring, a tragic accident. But the Rose family's groundbreaking research on a unique, fast-growing lichen with miraculous regenerative properties that had quietly been absorbed by Harrington Biotech within a year. I'd been digging for 48 hours straight, fueled by cheap coffee and a gnawing obsession that felt like a physical presence in my gut. The logical part of my brain, the part trained to demand evidence, screamed that this was all circumstantial. But the part of me that had seen a pen bloom, the part that felt the sheer, unnatural rightness of that circle of clover, that part was in charge now. A new email popped up. Anonymous sender. The subject line was a single word. Look. Attached was a scanned page from a decades-old, self-published zine. The paper was yellowed, the text smudged. It was titled, Urban Green, Myths of the Concrete Jungle. My eyes scanned the page until they landed on a paragraph that made my blood run cold. And when the balance tips too far, when the concrete and greed choke out the last breath of wildness, the city's spirit stirs. It doesn't fight with fists or fire, but with life itself. It manifests as the verdant shade, a guardian, often taking the form of a young woman, rootless and reflectionless. She is the gardener. She does not hate the weeds she pulls. She simply recognizes them as a threat to the whole garden, and with a touch, she prunes. Next to the text was a crude, hand-drawn illustration. A girl with long, flowing hair, standing in the center of a burned-out forest, new saplings sprouting at her bare feet. Rootless, reflectionless, a gardener. I grabbed my keys. I knew where she lived. My professionalism had died the moment I'd followed her home 2 days ago, watching from my car as she disappeared into a crumbling, ivy-covered brownstone that looked like it was being slowly reclaimed by the earth. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see her, to hear her voice, to confirm I wasn't going insane. I found her not inside, but in the small, wild garden behind the building. She was on her knees, her hands buried in the dark soil, tending to a patch of night-blooming jasmine. She didn't look up as I approached. "The lawyer," I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "Richard Sloane. They found him this morning. Her hands stilled, but she didn't turn. Did they? In his greenhouse. The police said it looked like the plants held him. The image from the detective's off-the-record description was seared into my mind. They said he was smiling. She finally lifted her head. There was no guilt in her eyes, no triumph, only a deep, unsettling calm. A greenhouse is a temple of forced life, a beautiful lie. It is a fitting place for a man who built his fortune on them to make his confession. This was it, the moment of confrontation. My heart hammered against my ribs. His confession? Evelyn, he's dead. You're killing them. The investors from the fire. The people who wronged your family. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something human in her eyes. Not anger, but pity. Alex, she said, and my name on her lips sounded like a secret. You see the world in such small, violent terms. Killing, wronging. She stood, wiping the rich, dark soil from her hands. They were perfectly clean. I am not a weapon of vengeance. I am a process of correction. A correction that ends with people dead. I shot back, my voice rising. A forest fire ends with trees dead, she replied, her tone as placid as a mountain lake. Yet from the ashes, the soil is nourished. The canopy opens to the sun, and the forest is reborn, stronger. Is the fire evil, or is it simply necessary? She took a step toward me. The scent of jasmine and wet earth was overwhelming. You are a storyteller. You see the narrative of a single tree. I see the health of the entire ecosystem. These men, their greed was a blight, a sickness that spread. They were choking the life from this city, from its people, from its very soul. I am not ending their stories, Alex. I am composting them, so that new, healthier things may grow. She reached out, not to touch me, but to a withered rose bush next to me. Her fingers hovered over a brittle, brown branch. Before my eyes, the gray bark turned green and supple. A single blood-red bud swelled, unfurled, and bloomed into a rose of such perfect velvety beauty it hurt to look at. The garden must be kept in balance, she whispered, her eyes holding mine. The question is not whether I am right or wrong. The question, Alex Graham, is what role you will play. Will you be a chronicler of the decay, or will you help plant the seeds of what comes next? She turned and walked back toward her brownstone, leaving me alone in the overgrown garden, the scent of a newly bloomed rose and the weight of an impossible choice hanging heavy in the air. I was no longer just chasing a story. I was being invited into it, and the most terrifying part was that I wanted to say yes. The rain turned New York into a city of smudged neon and reflected ghosts. I sat in my car, engine off, wipers still, watching the entrance to an exclusive high-rise on the Upper West Side, Edward Vance. The fourth name on the list I'd compiled from the fire records, a security consultant. His firm had been responsible for the lab's state-of-the-art system that had so catastrophically failed. Evelyn's words echoed in my head, a mantra that was slowly rewiring my conscience, composting them, so that new, healthier things may grow. It was insane. It was monstrous. And yet, staring at the sterile, gleaming tower where Vance lived, a monument to wealth built on the ashes of a family and their work, the monstrous began to feel necessary. This was the crossroads. I could call Miller, feed him my anonymous tip, and let the NYPD raid the place. They'd find nothing. Or I could do what the part of me that had seen the blooming pen screamed to do. I could trust the process. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just an address and a time. Now. It was her. It had to be. I got out of the car, the cold rain a shock to my system. I didn't head for the main entrance. I went to the service alley around back, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. A door was propped open with a cinder block, the security alarm panel beside it dark and dead. An invitation. I took the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the concrete well. The air smelled of bleach and damp. On the 17th floor, the door to the service corridor was ajar. I slipped through. Vance's apartment was silent, the only light coming from the spectacular rain-streaked panorama of the city. It was the kind of view that sold for millions. And there, silhouetted against the glass, was Edward Vance. He was on his knees, not in prayer, but in a state of catatonic terror. Thin, creeping vines of ivy, impossibly sprouted from the expensive potted plants on his terrace, had woven themselves around his ankles and wrists, holding him in a gentle but unbreakable grip. Evelyn stood before him. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking out at the city, her back to me. The system wasn't faulty, was it, Mr. Vance? Her voice was calm, conversational, as if discussing the weather. You were paid to look the other way, to ensure a specific, tragic outcome. Vance made a guttural, choking sound. Tears streamed down his face, cutting paths through his perfectly maintained tan. I didn't know. I didn't know they would be inside. You didn't ask, Evelyn said, her head tilting. The not asking was part of the service. A willful blindness. A rot that has festered in you for 15 years. She finally turned. Her eyes found mine in the darkness of the hallway. She knew I was there. This was for me. A demonstration. She took a step toward Vance. He flinched, trying to shrink away from her. She simply reached out and placed her fingertips on his sweating forehead. He froze. His eyes, wide with fear, went distant. The terror on his face melted away, replaced by a cascade of other emotions. Shame, so profound it was a physical pain to witness. Regret, a dawning, horrific clarity. He was seeing it all, not just the fire, but every cut corner, every silenced doubt, every moment of cowardice that had led him here. He was reliving the poison in his own soul. And then the smile began to form. It was different from the others. It wasn't serene or beatific. It was a smile of utter, devastating release. The smile of a man who has finally, after years of carrying an unbearable weight, been allowed to put it down. A single, clean tear rolled down his cheek. He sighed, a long, soft exhalation that seemed to come from the very depths of his being. Then he slumped forward, the ivy vines gently lowering him to the polished concrete floor. The smile remained. Evelyn withdrew her hand. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. I stepped into the apartment, my legs weak. The smell of rain and expensive cologne was thick in the air. I looked from the peacefully dead man to the ethereal girl who had just, killed him? Cured him? He looked happy, I stammered, the words feeling inadequate and foolish. He was forgiven, she corrected softly, walking towards the terrace door. The garden forgives the weeds when they return to the soil. It is their purpose. She stopped at the threshold, the city lights painting a halo around her slight frame. The last one is Victoria Harrington, the root of the blight. Will you help me find her, Alex? Not as a chronicler, as a guide. She didn't wait for an answer. She stepped out into the rain-swept night and was gone. I stood there, a witness, an accomplice, a convert. The line between justice and murder had not just been blurred, it had been erased, replaced by the simple, terrifying logic of the garden. I looked down at Edward Vance's face, at the profound peace etched there, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, what my answer would be. The story was no longer mine to write, it was mine to live. I don't remember leaving Vance's apartment. One moment I was standing over the smiling corpse. The next I was stumbling down the rain-slicked streets, the taste of copper and dread in my mouth. My phone buzzed incessantly, Miller, probably, having gotten wind of another smiling death. I silenced it. The NYPD, the rules of journalism, the entire world of cause and effect I used to inhabit, it all felt like a childish game now. I found myself at the entrance to Central Park. It was closed, the gates chained, but a smaller, pedestrian gate was, of course, unlocked. An invitation, just like the service door. The park at night was a different creature. The familiar paths became dark arteries under the canopy, the sounds of the city replaced by the rustle of unseen things and the drip of water from leaves. She was waiting for me by the Bethesda fountain. The angel at its summit seemed to watch over her, a stone guardian for a living myth. The terrace was empty, the vast space feeling both sacred and sinister. You came, she said. She wasn't smiling. You knew I would. My voice was flat, drained of all emotion. She nodded, her gaze sweeping over the sleeping park. This is the heart, the lungs. It remembers when all of this was forest and stream. It whispers the memories to me. I walk toward her, my footsteps echoing on the wet stone. What are you, really? The question fell from my lips, stripped of all professional pretense. A raw, desperate need to know. Are you Evelyn Rose? A ghost? Or something else? She turned those ancient forest-depth eyes on me. The child, Evelyn, her love for this place was pure. Her terror as the smoke filled her lungs was absolute. When her life left her, it did not simply vanish. It fused. With the grief of the land, with the rage of the displaced spirits, with the latent life in her parents' botanical creations. I am that fusion, a memory given purpose, a scar that learned to heal itself. It was more terrifying than any ghost story. She wasn't a soul seeking peace. She was a phenomenon, a self-correcting ecological equation wearing the skin of a dead girl. And me? I asked, the question barely a whisper. Why me? Because stories need to be told, Alex, she said, stepping closer. The air around her hummed with a subtle energy. A forest that falls with no one to hear it. Did it truly matter? My work is silent, invisible to those who refuse to see. You have the eyes to see, and the voice to make it matter. She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small, weathered leather pouch. The root of the blight is Victoria Harrington. She hides behind walls of money and influence, deep in her steel and glass hive. To find her, I need a root of my own, something that can slip through the cracks. She opened the pouch. Inside wasn't a tool or a map, but a single pale luminescent seed, no larger than a peppercorn. It pulsed with a soft internal light. This is a piece of me, a fragment of my awareness. She held it out to me. Plant it in the soil of a place she has touched, a place she believes is hers. Her corporate headquarters, her favorite charity, her private club. Does not matter. Once it touches earth that bears her stain, it will grow. It will become my eyes, my ears. My hand trembled as I reached for it. This was the point of no return. Taking this seed wasn't just helping her, it was becoming a part of her, a part of the gardening. How will I get in? For the first time that night, a hint of her true, otherworldly smile touched her lips. It wasn't the empty smile of the dead men. It was knowing, powerful. You are a storyteller, Alex. You know how to make people believe what you want them to believe. Use your words. Use your charm. Use the access your press badge grants you. Her fingers brushed against mine as I took the seed. A jolt, not of life this time, but of a cold, deep, ancient power shot through me. Be the distraction, let me be the cure. The seed was warm in my palm, throbbing with a faint, steady rhythm, like a tiny, dormant heart. I closed my fingers around it. The deal was sealed. I turned to leave, the weight of the seed immense in my hand. Alex, she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the vast terrace. I looked back. Her expression was unreadable again, but her words were crystal clear, and they froze the blood in my veins. Be careful where you plant it. All soil is connected, and some secrets have very deep roots. You might find more than you are looking for. She turned and walked towards the fountain, her form seeming to dissolve into the spray and shadow until she was gone. I stood alone, clutching the living seed. I was her accomplice now, her guide, her planter of spies. I had the story of a lifetime burning a hole in my pocket, and I could never tell a soul. But her final warning echoed in my mind. Some secrets have very deep roots. What if one of those secrets was buried in my own family's past? What if, in helping the gardener prune the weeds, I was about to unearth a root that led right back to my own father's doorstep? The first seed was in my hand, but the doubt, a far more tenacious and dangerous seed, had already been planted in my mind. The Metropolitan Club felt less like a building and more like a mausoleum for living ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of old money, expensive perfume, and unspoken deals. I adjusted the cuff of my rented tuxedo, my press badge feeling like a child's toy in this temple of inherited power. My heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. In my pocket, the seed pulsed with a warm, steady rhythm. a constant, unnerving reminder of the pact I'd made in the rain. I am the distraction, I told myself, repeating Evelyn's words like a mantra. Let her be the cure. My target wasn't Victoria Harrington herself. She held court across the room, a queen surrounded by sycophants, but the soil she had poisoned. The club's famed winter garden, a sprawling indoor courtyard filled with rare tropical plants under a vaulted glass ceiling. It was the perfect symbol of her world, beauty meticulously curated, imprisoned, and utterly controlled. I snagged a glass of champagne from a passing tray, the bubbles doing nothing to cut through the dryness in my throat. I weaved through the crowd, offering practiced smiles and empty pleasantries to faces I recognized from the society pages. My reporter's mask was firmly in place, but beneath it, every nerve was screaming. I found my mark. A powerful-looking man I knew was on the board of Harrington Biotech. Mr. Thorne, I said, sliding into conversation with a well-rehearsed line about his recent philanthropic award. I was charming, self-deprecating, everything a good journalist needs to be to get a source to open up. I was the perfect distraction. As I talked, nodding at his inflated stories, my mind was screaming. He knew. He signed the checks. He is a weed. The thought didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like it had been planted there, taking root alongside the seed in my pocket. After 10 minutes of inane chatter, I excused myself, claiming I needed some air. I slipped away from the throng and into the relative quiet of the winter garden. The air was humid, heavy with the loamy scent of earth and the cloying sweetness of orchids. It was a beautiful lie, just like Evelyn had said. My hands were slick with sweat. This was it. I found a secluded corner behind a massive, prehistoric-looking fern. The planter was filled with rich, dark soil. I glanced around. No one. I knelt, pretending to tie my shoe. My fingers, trembling, dug into my pocket and closed around the seed. It was warmer now, almost hot. As my hand emerged, a woman's sharp voice cut through the foliage. "Looking for something, Mr. Graham?" I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Victoria Harrington stood at the entrance to my secluded nook, a thin, predatory smile on her lips. She held a glass of vodka, neat, her eyes like chips of flint. "Just admiring the flora," I stammered, getting to my feet and quickly shoving my hand back into my pocket. The seed felt like a burning coal. "It's a remarkable collection." "It is," she agreed, stepping closer. Her gaze swept over the plants with a sense of ownership so absolute it was chilling. "It requires constant vigilance, of course. The right temperature, the right light, the right pruning." Her eyes snapped back to me. "Weeds have a tendency to sprout in the most unexpected places. One must be ruthless in cutting them out before they take hold." Was she talking about the plants, or about me? The double meaning hung in the air, thick and poisonous. She knew who I was. Of course she did. "I suppose that's true in journalism as well," I managed to reply, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in porcelain. Her smile widened, but it never reached her eyes. "Indeed. A word of advice, from one professional to another. Some stories have very deep roots. Pulling at them carelessly can bring the whole garden down on your head." She took a slow sip of her vodka. "My son Carl, he was careless. Look where it got him." The threat was as clear as the glass in her hand. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, cold dread pooling in my stomach. She wasn't just a target. She was a predator who knew she was being hunted. The moment she was gone, I acted on pure adrenaline. I dropped to one knee again, fumbling the seed from my pocket. I didn't have time for finesse. I scraped a small hole in the soil at the base of the fern and dropped the glowing seed in, covering it with a handful of dark, moist earth. A wave of immediate, visceral revulsion hit me. It felt like I had just desecrated a grave. The soil where I'd buried it seemed to writhe for a second, a faint, sickly green light flashing beneath the surface before fading. A sharp, coppery taste filled my mouth, and a dizzying wave of images and sensations flooded my mind, not of growth and life, but of chemical burns, choked rivers, and the cold, dead gaze of a fish washed up on a polluted shore. This soil wasn't just touched by Victoria Harrington. It was saturated with her poison. I stumbled back, gasping, clutching the fern for support. To my horror, where my hand touched its trunk, The vibrant green fronds began to curl and blacken at the edges, as if reacting to the contamination I had just introduced. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket, a single stark message from Evelyn. The soil is more poisoned than I knew. The connection is painful, but it holds. Now I can hear. I looked at my hand, then at the dying fern, and finally in the direction Victoria Harrington had disappeared. I hadn't just planted a spy. I had injected a virus into a diseased host, and I could already feel the fever starting. The drive home was a blur of neon and shadow. I scrubbed my hands raw in the sink, but the phantom sensation of that contaminated soil clung to my skin, a greasy film of other people's sins. The dying fern's blackened fronds were burned onto my retinas. I had done that. I had brought death, not life, to that plant. Evelyn's cure felt more like a targeted toxin. I expected silence from her. Instead, my phone lit up just as I collapsed onto my couch, exhausted and soul-sick. Is less than, unknown sender, is greater than. The connection is unstable. The poison runs deep, but it speaks. Come. An address followed, her brownstone. When I arrived, the door was unlocked. The air inside was different. The usual scent of damp earth and growing things was now undercut by a sharp, acrid tang, like ozone after a lightning strike or the smell of a burned-out circuit board. Evelyn stood in the center of the main room, her back to me. Vines snaked across the floor and walls, pulsing with a faint, sickly green light, their rhythm erratic, stuttering. Some of the leaves were already spotted with black necrosis. "It hurts," she said, her voice strained, a thin wire of pain running through its usual melodic tone. She didn't turn. Listening to her, it's like drinking acid, but the garden must know its enemy. She gestured to the largest wall, now completely covered in a living tapestry of vegetation. Look. As I watched, images began to flicker across the wall of leaves, unstable and ghostly, like a damaged film reel projected onto a restless screen. A flash. Victoria Harrington in a starkly modern office, leaning across a polished steel desk. The fire was a necessary recalibration. The Ross patents are the foundation of our next generation of pharmaceuticals. Grief is a small price for progress. The man across from her nodded, his face a mask of cold ambition. Another flicker. The same man, in a different setting, handing an envelope thick with cash to a city fire inspector. The inspector's face was pale, his hands shaking as he took it. A soundbite, sharp and clear. Victoria's voice, laced with venom. That reporter, Graham, kept sniffing around. Offer him a consultancy, a generous one. If he refuses, well, the city is dangerous. Accidents happen. Graham. The name hit me like a physical blow. My father. It was one thing to suspect, another to hear the order to silence him, to potentially have him killed, spoken with such casual cruelty. The room swayed around me. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. There's more, Evelyn whispered, her own pain seemingly forgotten in the face of my reaction. The vines writhed, and the images shifted, becoming more personal, more invasive. A memory, not a business transaction. A younger Victoria, standing before a grand mirror in a lavish bedroom. She wasn't the iron-willed matriarch here. Her face was etched with a desperate, fearful hunger. She touched her own reflection. It should have been mine from the start, she hissed to herself. That life, that recognition, that power over life and death. He owed me. The obsession in her eyes was terrifying. This wasn't just about money. It was a deeply personal, decades-old grudge against my father, against the Ross family, against anyone who had what she felt was rightfully hers. The final image solidified, clearer than the others. It was a document, a scanned copy of a handwritten page from a personal journal. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and frantic. Liam Ross continues to refuse. His morals are an inconvenience. But I have his notes. The key is not the lichen itself, but the mycorrhizal network it fosters, a biological communication web. If we can synthesize the signal, we could theoretically influence neural pathways, induce states of peace, bliss, or submission. The potential is godlike. He doesn't see it. He calls it a perversion. But I will have it. I will have it all. The words hung in the acrid air. It was worse than I imagined. My parents' death wasn't just about stealing a patent for a new drug. Victoria Harrington was trying to weaponize their life's work, to create a tool for mass control. The smiling deaths weren't just poetic justice. They were a dark, twisted proof of concept. Evelyn wasn't just pruning weeds. She was trying to stop the manufacture of a psychological plague. The vine wall flickered and died, the leaves going dull and limp. Evelyn sagged, the vines retracting from her as if in pain. The effort of maintaining the connection in that poisoned environment had taken its toll. She finally turned to face me. She looked paler, almost translucent. You see now? The blight is not just in the past. It is poised to spread, to infect millions. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. The scale of it was overwhelming. Her green eyes pinned me in place. The man in the office, the one who nodded. He is the next thread. Find him. His name is Alistair Vance, Edward Vance's brother. The corruption is a family affair. A new target. A new name. The path forward was clear, a dark and narrowing tunnel. But all I could see was my father's face, and hear Victoria Harrington's voice casually discussing his accident. The hunt was no longer just about Evelyn's garden or a 15-year-old fire. It was personal. Alistair Vance. The name echoed in the silence of my apartment. A ghost summoned by poisoned roots. Brother to the late Edward. A senior partner at the law firm that had overseen the patent transfer after the fire. According to the vine wall's flickering testimony, he was the coldly ambitious nod in Victoria's office, the architect of the legal theft that had built Harrington Biotech. Sleep was a forgotten country. My father's face, Victoria's voice, the journal's godlike ambitions, they all swirled in my head, a toxic cocktail of grief and rage. The professional detachment I'd worn like armor was gone, stripped away, leaving raw, personal vengeance in its wake. Evelyn needed to stop a plague. I needed to break the woman who had broken my family. I started digging, not as a journalist now, but as a hunter. My press credentials were just keys to pick digital locks. I bypassed firewalls, accessed encrypted corporate directories, cross-referenced private flight manifests with Vance's known haunts. The methodical work was a relief, a familiar rhythm in a world that had stopped making sense. I found him, or at least, his pattern. Alistair Vance was a creature of habit. Tuesdays and Thursdays, he worked late at his firm's midtown office, a sleek glass tower that seemed to scrape the underbelly of the rain-heavy clouds. He always left alone, around 9:30 p.m., and took his chauffeured car to a private members club in the West Village. A man who valued his routine, his control. It was a vulnerability. He's predictable, I said to Evelyn later that day. We stood in the overgrown garden behind her brownstone. The necrotic spots on the vines had spread, but the erratic pulsing had steadied into a grim, determined rhythm. She was learning to filter the poison. His car route is always the same. A narrow street, usually quiet. If we can intercept him there, between the office and the club. We do not need to intercept him, she said, her voice still carrying a faint strain. She plucked a withered leaf from a jasmine plant, and a new, vibrant green bud immediately swelled in its place. We need him to come to us, to a place where the soil is receptive. Her plan was audacious, simple, and terrifying. We wouldn't ambush Vance on the street. We would use his own property against him, his weekend home in the Hudson Valley. A place where the land, she claimed, was less scarred by the city's constant poison, where a seed could grow faster, stronger, and with far greater effect. He's there this weekend, I confirmed, having already checked his security system's activity logs, a ridiculously easy hack. But his property is gated, armed security, motion sensors. We can't just walk in. Evelyn looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something that wasn't ancient sorrow or righteous anger. It was cunning. You will get us in, Alex. You are the distraction, remember? A faint, almost smile touched her lips. A lost hiker, a car trouble, a story. Make him open the gate. Bud. The plan felt flimsy, reckless. But the memory of my father's name on Victoria's lips steeled my nerve. Fine. I'll get us in." The rain was a persistent cold drizzle the following Thursday night as I tailed Vance's black sedan from a safe distance. My heart was a drum in my chest. This was it, not just observation, active infiltration. As his car turned onto the familiar, tree-lined street leading to his club, I made my move. I accelerated, swerved around him, and then, with a calculated jerk of the wheel, let my car's rear bumper clip his front fender. It was a low-speed impact, little more than a loud crunch of plastic and metal, but it was enough. I was out of my car in an instant, playing the part of the frantic, apologetic driver. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. The rain, I just slid." The driver's window of the sedan rolled down, not the chauffeur, but Alistair Vance himself, his face a mask of cold irritation. "Do you have any idea whose car this is?" "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me just get my insurance." I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking with genuine performative adrenaline. As I did, I let my phone accidentally slip from my grasp, skittering under his car. "For God's sake," Vance muttered, opening his door to retrieve it. This was the moment. As he bent down, his head and shoulders exposed outside the armored shell of his car, the ivy climbing the brick wall beside us began to move. Not a dramatic, monstrous growth, but a subtle, insidious creep. A single, slender tendril, tipped with a tiny, almost invisible bud, detached itself and, with the gentleness of a falling spider, brushed against the back of his exposed neck. Vance straightened up, my phone in his hand. He shuddered violently, as if from a sudden chill. He handed me the phone, his irritation now mixed with a flicker of confusion. "Just have your people call my people," he said, his voice slightly distant. He rubbed the back of his neck, frowning, then got back into his car without another word. I stood in the rain, watching his taillights disappear. It was done. The seed was planted. Not in soil, but in flesh. My own phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. "The fox has taken the bait. The hunt begins at his den. This weekend." I got back into my damaged car, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only a cold, hollow feeling. We had crossed a new line. We weren't just planting spies in soil anymore. We were infecting people. The means were starting to mirror the monstrosity we were fighting, and I was no longer sure where the hunter ended and the monster began. The Hudson Valley unfolded around us, a picture of affluent tranquility, rolling hills, meticulously kept fences, estates hidden behind dense curtains of old-growth trees. Alistair Vance's property was one of the more imposing, a modern glass and steel structure cantilevered over a ravine, a testament to cold, contemporary wealth. From our vantage point, concealed within the tree line across the road, it looked less like a home and more like a fortified bunker designed by a famous architect. My rented SUV felt flimsy, a tin can in the shadow of this fortress. The plan, which had seemed cunning in the city, now felt suicidally naive. "There's no way," I muttered, scanning the high wall, the visible camera housings, the sleek black dome of a motion sensor. "The gate alone is a monster. Even if I get him to open it, we'll be swarmed by security before we take 2 steps. Evelyn sat perfectly still in the passenger seat. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow and deep. She looked paler than usual, the vibrant green of her irises seeming to have dimmed. The seed she had planted in Vance was taking its toll on her, a constant, draining connection to a poisoned host. "The security is not the problem," she said, her voice a soft exhale. Her fingers, resting on her knees, twitched slightly. "The land is resistant. It remembers the concrete they poured, the trees they cleared. It is angry, but it is not loyal to him. Watch." 100 yards away, at the base of the formidable main gate, a patch of ivy clinging to the stone pillar began to stir. It wasn't the subtle creep from the city street. This was a visible, aggressive surge of growth. Thick, woody vines, like green pythons, erupted from the soil and snaked up the metal bars of the gate. They didn't try to force it open. Instead, they sought the electronic keypad and the magnetic lock housing. With a sound of cracking plastic and tearing metal, the vines constricted, crushing the components. A spark fizzled, and the gate's status light died. Simultaneously, Across the property, other small dramas played out. A camera mounted on a nearby tree suddenly sagged, its view obscured by a rapidly sprouting wisteria. Another, panning across the driveway, seized up, its gears grinding as thin, tough tendrils forced their way into its casing. "The eyes are blind," Evelyn whispered. A single drop of dark, syrupy liquid like plant sap, mixed with blood trickling from her nostril. She wiped it away with a detached gesture. "The teeth are being pulled, but the work is difficult here." It was terrifying and magnificent. She wasn't hacking the system. She was giving the land itself a voice, and that voice was screaming, "Get out." My role as the distraction was redundant. The garden was the distraction, the infiltrator, and the weapon, all in one. We didn't need to wait for nightfall. Under the cover of the midday sun and a manufactured technological blackout, we simply walked through the ruined main gate. The silence was eerie. No blaring alarms, no shouting guards, just the sound of the wind and the faint, continuing crunch of vegetation dismantling man-made security. We found Alistair Vance on the vast rear deck, overlooking the ravine. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "Nothing is working. The gate, the cameras, the comms. I don't care what the contractor says, this is a systemic failure. Get someone out here now." He hadn't seen us yet. Up close, he looked terrible. His skin was sallow, his eyes bloodshot. He kept scratching absently at the back of his neck, where the tiny bud had touched him. The infection was taking hold. "Mr. Vance?" I said, stepping onto the deck. He spun around, his eyes widening in shock, then narrowing in recognition and rage. "You, the reporter from the other night." His gaze darted to Evelyn, who stood silently behind me, and a flicker of primal fear crossed his face. "What is this? What have you done?" "We're here to talk about the Ross fire," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "And the patents, and the journal." The color drained from his face. "I have no idea what you're talking about. You're trespassing. My security is currently being composted," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. She took a step forward, and Vance took an involuntary step back, his heel hitting the deck railing. "You signed the documents, you structured the shell companies, you are a vessel for the Blight, and you will confess." "Confess?" he spat, a desperate bravado returning. "To whom? You? I'll have you both arrested, you psychotic." He stopped. His body went rigid. His eyes, fixed on Evelyn, lost their focus. The phone slipped from his grasp and clattered on the deck. He began to tremble, a full-body shudder. "No," he whimpered, his voice small and terrified. The fire. It wasn't." Victoria said it was clean. A reset. He was no longer talking to us. He was reliving it. "The reports. We buried the initial findings. The accelerant, the inspector." "Oh God, the inspector." He clawed at his throat, as if he couldn't breathe. "And the Graham guy. He was getting too close. We just had to nudge him. A paid-off source, a discredited story. I didn't mean for him to." He collapsed to his knees, sobbing, great ragged breaths tearing from his chest. The polished, powerful lawyer was gone, replaced by a broken man drowning in the toxic wake of his own sins. It was a victory. We had our confession. But watching him unravel, consumed by a guilt that wasn't entirely his own but had been pulled from him like a toxin from the soil, felt less like justice and more like a violation. Evelyn stood over him, her expression unreadable. "It is done. The truth has been harvested." Suddenly, Vance's head snapped up. His tears stopped. The terror in his eyes was replaced by a strange, lucid calm. A small, cruel smile so unlike his previous breakdown twisted his lips. It was Victoria's smile. His voice, when he spoke, was different too. It was layered, as if another voice spoke through his, colder and sharper. "You think you are pruning a weed, little root whisperer?" Evelyn recoiled as if struck. Vance's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "You are merely watering the garden with your own pain." He His gaze shifted to me. The scribbler thinks he seeks his father's ghost, but he is blind to the cage being built around his own soul. Come to the source if you dare. The heart of the blight awaits. We have been expecting you. The voice vanished. The strange light left Vance's eyes, and he slumped forward, unconscious. The victory was ash in my mouth. This wasn't just a confession. It had been a message, a trap, and we had walked right into it. The drive back to the city was a silent, grim procession. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The image of Vance's possessed smile burned into my mind. We have been expecting you. The words echoed, a taunt from the heart of the blight itself. We hadn't been hunters, we'd been mice led into a maze. Evelyn sat curled in the passenger seat, her face turned to the window, watching the blurred landscape. The confident, otherworldly presence she'd exuded was gone, replaced by a palpable vulnerability. The dark sap had dried under her nose like a bad omen. She used him, Evelyn finally whispered, her voice raspy. She used my own connection, my own touch, to speak through him. She has found a way to reflect the garden's voice back at itself, twisted and poisoned. What does that mean? I asked, my own voice tight. It means she is learning, adapting. The journal, the research into the neural network. She is not just trying to replicate it. She is learning to defend against it, to weaponize the principles against the source. She turned to look at me, her green eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in them before. Alex, if she can create a field that severs my connection to the city's life, I will be just a ghost, a memory, and the garden will be left undefended. The stakes were no longer about the past. They were about the future of the city itself. The hollow feeling in my stomach deepened. Back in my apartment, the chaos of my war room felt like a relic from a simpler time. I poured a whiskey, the glass trembling in my hand. Evelyn stood by the window, her silhouette fragile against the city lights. We can't stop, I said, the alcohol burning a path of false courage down my throat. We have to go to the source, her headquarters. We end this. It is a trap, Alex, she said, stating the obvious with a weary finality. All the more reason to spring it on our terms. I slammed the glass down, the liquid sloshing over the rim. Before she's ready. Before she finishes whatever Silent Seed project she's working on. The name had come to me during the drive, pulled from Vance's fragmented, terrified memories. A project designed to create silence where there was life. Our terms? A bitter, almost human laugh escaped her lips. You think we have any terms left? She has seen my methods. She has felt my touch. She knows you. Her gaze was accusing, and I flinched. The moment we step into her domain, we step into a cage designed specifically for us. The truth of it settled over me, cold and heavy. We were outmaneuvered. My recklessness, my personal vendetta, had led us here. I had been the perfect pawn, leading the queen right to the king. I sank onto the couch, the fight draining out of me. So what do? Wait for her to come to us? To finish her project and unmake you? Evelyn was silent for a long time. She walked away from the window and knelt on the floor in the center of the room. She placed her palms flat on the wooden boards. No, she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its old rooted strength. We do not wait, and we do not charge blindly into the jaws of the beast. If she has learned to reflect my voice, then I must learn to sing a song she cannot mimic. There was incendiating and a bray. She closed her eyes. A soft green glow emanated from her palms, seeping into the floorboards. I felt a vibration through the soles of my feet, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very foundations of the building. The plants in my apartment, a neglected spider plant on the bookshelf, a basil herb on the windowsill, perked up, their leaves unfurling, reaching toward her. What are you doing? I whispered, awed and terrified. Calling to the deepest roots, she murmured, her voice layered with the sound of rustling leaves and shifting earth. To the old ones, the ones that remember this land before the first stone was laid. Their song is slow, their memory is long, their strength is immense. The vibration intensified. A fine crack appeared in the plaster of my ceiling. Outside the window, I could see the branches of the tree lining the street trembling. not from wind, but from a deep, internal agitation. "It is a risk," she admitted, her body beginning to tremble with the strain. "To wake them is to stir powers I cannot fully control. The pruning of a single weed is one thing. To ask the ancient forest to rise against a fortress of steel, the collateral damage." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I understood. We were no longer talking about a targeted removal. We were talking about an earthquake, a war between the world that was and the world that is, and I had helped start it. The humming reached a crescendo, and then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Evelyn slumped forward, catching herself on her hands, breathing heavily. The glow faded. The plants in my apartment settled, but they seemed larger, more vibrant, watchful. She looked up at me, exhaustion etched on her face, but her eyes blazed with a terrifying, renewed purpose. "The old ones are stirring," she said. "They have heard the blight's mockery. They will not be silenced. The trap is set, Alex, but not by her, by us. The final pruning is coming, and it will not be gentle." I looked from her determined face to the cracked ceiling, to the watchful plants, and out the window at the unnaturally still night. The cage was indeed being built, but we were no longer the birds to be trapped inside. We were becoming the storm that would shatter. The city held its breath. Dawn was still an hour away, but the deep, pre-dark blue of the sky felt wrong. It was too still. From my apartment window, the familiar skyline of New York was unchanged, and yet everything had changed. It was like looking at a predator frozen mid-pounce, knowing the stillness was a lie. The silence was the first clue. The constant, low-grade hum of the city, the one you only notice when it's gone, had vanished. My ears rang with the absence of sound. Then I saw the details. In the street below, the ginkgo trees stood as if carved from jade. Not a leaf trembled. But from the cracks in the pavement, where only the hardiest weeds dared to grow, thick blades of lush emerald grass had erupted, forming a velvety, silent carpet across the asphalt. Ivy, normally a slow, patient climber, had sheathed the lower 3 stories of the building across the street overnight, its leaves so dark a green they were almost black. It wasn't a chaotic overgrowth, it was a military deployment. The city was being fortified, silently, leaf by leaf. I turned from the window. Evelyn stood in the center of the room. The change in her was even more profound. She was barely opaque anymore, a woman-shaped constellation of chlorophyll and light. The green of her eyes had bled into the whites, glowing with a soft, internal radiance. When she moved, it was with a strange, fluid slowness, as if she were navigating deep water. Traces of fine, root-like filaments, glowing with the same soft green, now traced paths up her neck and along her temples. "They are here," she said, and her voice was no longer just hers. It was layered with the creak of ancient boughs and the whisper of turning compost. "The old ones. They sleep in the bedrock, in the forgotten aquifers. They are displeased." I swallowed, my throat dry. "What do they want?" Her luminous eyes fixed on me. "What they have always wanted. Balance. The blight has become a scream in their silence. It must be quieted." The word held no malice, only a finality that was more terrifying than any threat. I nodded, turning to the small table that served as my makeshift armory. But I wasn't reaching for a weapon. I picked up my digital recorder, checked its battery. I slung my camera over my shoulder. My tools, my purpose. I was not a soldier in this war. I was the scribe, the witness. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of my father's old pocket watch in my trousers. I took it out, clicking it open. The familiar face, the delicate hands frozen at a time I'd never know. The Harrington crest etched inside the lid seemed to mock me, a symbol of the poison in my own bloodline. But it was also a part of the story. I snapped it shut and tucked it away, not as a burden anymore, but as evidence. A piece of the truth I was about to record. "Are you ready?" Evelyn's multi-voiced question stirred the air. I looked at her, this impossible being who had upended my life, who had shown me a world of magic and terror lurking beneath the concrete. I thought of my father, his weakness, his complicity, and his ultimate, fatal attempt at redemption. My own path was clear now. It wasn't about clearing his name or avenging his death. It was about ensuring that the true story of the Ross family, of the garden, of the blight and the pruning was told. "I'm ready," I said, and my voice was steady, "to bear witness." A faint, almost smile touched Evelyn's luminous lips. It held an eternity of sorrow and a spark of something like hope. "Then it is time. The heart of the blight awaits, and the garden is going to war." She walked toward the door, and as she passed my neglected basil plant on the windowsill, it didn't just perk up. It bloomed explosively, tiny white flowers bursting forth and releasing a scent of such pure, sweet life that it stung my eyes. I shouldered my bag, took one last look at the silent, waiting city, and followed the fading glow of her footsteps out the door. The storm was not coming. It was already here. The Harrington Tower loomed before us, a needle of steel and ambition piercing the stagnant air, but its base was under siege. Thick, woody vines, pulsing with the same soft green light as Evelyn, had scaled its flanks, their grip cracking the polished granite facade. The main entrance, a masterpiece of bulletproof glass and brushed steel, stood shattered, not by force, but by the gentle, inexorable pressure of 1,000 creeping tendrils that had grown through its seams, prying it apart like a stubborn oyster. It was a victory, but it felt like a staged one. The door wasn't barred, it was held open, an invitation to the slaughter. "She is waiting," Evelyn said, her voice a chorus of rustling leaves. The root-like filaments on her face glowed brighter, a visible manifestation of her connection to the besieging flora. We stepped inside. The grand lobby was a cathedral of corporate power, now defiled by nature's insurgency. Plants burst from cracks in the marble floor, ferns sprouted from reception desks, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine, a stark contrast to the sterile, chilled air that still whistled from broken vents. The elevator banks were dark, dead, but the emergency stairwell door was wedged open by a thick, coiled root. We began to climb. With every floor, the electronic hum grew louder, a dissonant counterpoint to the organic silence we had left outside. The air grew colder, drier. The invading plant life thinned, then ceased altogether by the time we reached the penthouse access door. It was a stark dividing line. Behind us, a living, breathing jungle reclaiming its territory. Ahead, a sterile, metallic silence. I pushed the door open. We entered not a laboratory as I'd imagined, but a vast, circular chamber that felt more like a temple or an operating theater. The walls were seamless white alloy, and the entire ceiling was a single massive pane of one-way glass, showing the pre-dawn sky as a dull, featureless gray. In the center of the room stood a complex, crystalline structure that pulsed with a cold blue light, the silent seed. Wires and conduits snaked from it into the floor, and the high-pitched hum was emanating from its core, a physical pressure against my eardrums. And there, standing before it, was Victoria Harrington. She looked older than her press photos, her face a mask of calculated calm, but her eyes burned with a fervent, almost religious intensity. She wore a lab coat over her elegant dress. "The root whisperer and the scribbler," she said, her voice amplified and distorted slightly by the room's acoustics. "You've come to see my masterpiece." She gestured to the pulsing crystal. "The silent seed, not a weapon to kill, you understand, a scalpel, to perform a necessary lobotomy on this unruly beast you call a city." "It's over, Victoria," I said, my voice sounding small against the hum. "The world will know what you did." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "What I did? I am a gardener too, Mr. Graham. I prune away weakness, inefficiency, sentimentality. The Ross family and their pure research were a sentimental weakness. Your father was an inefficiency that needed pruning. The mention of my father was a physical blow, but I stood my ground. He worked for you. Initially, he saw the opportunity, the power we could wield, but he grew a conscience," she sneered. "A weed in his own mind. His attempt to expose me was messy, but ultimately it led you here, led her here." She turned her burning gaze to Evelyn. "The ultimate impurity. a ghost woven from grief and fungus. Do you know why you can't enter this room fully, little root? Why your vines stop at the door? Evelyn stood rigid, her light flickering. The room's cold, artificial environment was a poison to her. This chamber is shielded, Victoria proclaimed triumphantly. It emits a field based on the Ross's own research into mycorrhizal signaling, a frequency that severs connection. It doesn't kill life. It just tells it to be quiet. She took a step closer to the silent seed. You are a product of a noisy, chaotic emotional system. I am creating a world of perfect, silent order. Evelyn shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. The glow of the filaments on her skin dimmed. Understand nothing. The silence you seek is death. It is control. Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. And it is the future. She placed a hand on the central crystal. And you, the last vestige of the old noisy world, will be its first true test subject. The hum of the silent seed intensified, shifting to a painful, piercing whine. The blue light flared, and a visible wave of energy pulsed outwards. Evelyn cried out a raw, agonized sound that was entirely her own, stripped of its chorus of nature. She fell to her knees, her form dissolving at the edges, becoming translucent, insubstantial. The green light within her guttered like a dying candle. "Evelyn!" I shouted, starting towards her. But Victoria was faster. She pulled a device from her lab coat, a sleek, pistol-like instrument with a crystalline tip that glowed with the same cold blue light as the seed. She aimed it not at me, but at the weakened, kneeling form of Evelyn. "The final pruning," Victoria whispered, her eyes wide with madness. In that moment, the world narrowed to the space between us. The hum of the machine, the gasp of pain from Evelyn, the triumphant gleam in Victoria's eyes. The story wasn't ending here. Not like this. My hand closed around the cold metal in my pocket. Time seemed to fracture. My arm had moved on an instinct deeper than thought, fueled by a lifetime of chasing ghosts and the raw, screaming need to protect the one impossible thing that had given them all meaning. The heavy silver watch left my hand, a clumsy spinning missile. It wasn't aimed at Victoria, but at the pulsing heart of the silent seed. It struck the central crystal with a sound like a bell tolling in a vacuum. A web of fractures exploded across the crystal's surface. The cold blue light within flared, wild and unstable, then flickered. The piercing whine dropped into a guttural, grinding roar. Sparks erupted from the conduits snaking across the floor, and the sterile white light of the chamber strobed violently. Victoria's triumphant shriek morphed into a cry of pure, outraged disbelief. "No!" The shield was broken. The artificial silence shattered, and the garden answered. It was not a slow, creeping reclamation. It was an explosion. The vines that had halted at the penthouse door now surged into the room like a green tidal wave. They didn't crawl. They lunged, whipping across the alloy walls, shattering the one-way glass ceiling with a roar of falling diamond rain. The pre-dawn sky, now visible, was a swirling vortex of greenish clouds. Evelyn rose from her knees. But it was no longer just Evelyn. The faint, woman-shaped outline of light and leaf was being inundated, consumed by the raw power she had summoned. Her eyes became pools of molten emerald, her voice the crashing of 1,000 falling trees. "The blight ends here." The command was not spoken. It was felt, a seismic shift in the very air. The vines ignored me completely. They converged on Victoria Harrington. She backed away, the crystalline pistol falling from her nerveless fingers. She fired a bolt of blue energy, but it was like spitting into a hurricane. A vine, thick as my thigh, wrapped around her waist, lifting her from the ground. Another coiled around her arm, not with violence, but with an inexorable, gentle pressure. She screamed, not in pain, but in sheer primal terror at the loss of control, at the utter presence of the force that held her. This was not an execution. It was a dissolution. The vines pulled her not apart, but in. They enveloped her, weaving around her struggling form, absorbing her into a living, growing sculpture of intertwined roots, moss, and blooming nightshade. Her screams were muffled, then silenced, not by suffocation, but by integration. The last thing I saw was not a face contorted in agony, but one smoothed into an expression of vacant, vegetative peace, her eyes glazing over like damp stones before she was completely swallowed by the verdant mass. The silent seed gave one final, apocalyptic crack and died, its light extinguished forever. The storm of growth ceased as suddenly as it began. The vines settled, becoming still, their furious energy spent. They remained, a permanent, beautiful, and terrifying monument woven into the very structure of the ruined penthouse. And Evelyn? Evelyn was fading. The immense power that had filled her was receding, and with it, her form. She stood before me, translucent as morning mist, the root filaments on her skin fading like forgotten memories. "It is done," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, once again her own. "The garden is balanced." I stumbled towards her, my heart a hollow ache. "Evelyn," she smiled, a true, gentle smile, devoid of sorrow or ancient weight. It was the smile of a job completed. "Do not mourn, Alex. A gardener's work is never finished. I was but one season." She reached out a fading hand, and for a moment, her cool, ethereal fingers brushed my cheek. There was no jolt of power, only a profound, aching tenderness. "Tell the story, not of monsters or angels, but of the garden, and the necessary, endless cycle of growth and decay." Her form dissolved completely then, not into nothingness, but into a shower of luminous pollen that hung in the air for a breathtaking moment, catching the first true rays of the rising sun now streaming through the shattered ceiling. Then, the particles drifted away on the morning breeze, scattering over the wounded, healing city. I stood alone in the silence, the only sounds the gentle rustle of new leaves and the distant, hopeful cry of a waking bird. The air smelled of rain and earth and possibility. It was over.